Welcome to today's webinar, Overcoming Adversity, the Connections Between Setbacks and Resilience, sponsored by the Emory Alumni Association, Alumni Career Services, and the Candler School of Theology. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us, especially as we were just discussing the day after Valentine's Day, so happy Valentine's Day to you all. My name is Sarah Rawls, Director of Alumni Career Services, and I'm thrilled today to be here at the Miller Ward Alumni House with Dr. Trice Glenn, a 2012 graduate of the Candler School of Theology, who wears many hats, so I'll talk about her. She doesn't just have one title, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but she is a counselor, a pastor, and currently an adjunct professor at Emory, so we're excited about both of her ties with Emory. And I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Glenn at an alumni event this past fall, and we started talking about a webinar series that could touch on personal issues that we feel professionals must master if they're really going to be their best selves at work. So there's a lot of social and emotional issues that we know you need to make sure you're tuning up to go in and meet all your goals at work. So today we're kicking it off with one subject that we thought was maybe the most important for people to master these days, and that's resilience. And of course, we were also just talking about this flu season and how you are working on that resilience and building up your immunity there. But what are you also doing to recover from setbacks that you're facing at work or in your personal life so that you can be your best self at work? So before I turn it over to Dr. Glenn, I just want to remind you, today's presentation is being recorded, and you can access the replay of this webinar within 2 days on our Emory University YouTube channel. We have a career webinars playlist where we house over 80 past webinars on leadership, career change, and industry topics. So look for the webinars there. And afterwards, I will send information on the recording as well as the next webinar in Dr. Glenn's series. I appreciate those of you who sent in questions in advance. Dr. Glenn will be touching on those during her presentation and address some at the end of the webinar. So please type in any additional questions. We'll leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So type in questions as you think of them in the question area on your GoToWebinar control panel. And if you're having any technical difficulties, please feel free to submit those concerns to me in the question area as well. And lastly, a bit more about our presenter. Again, Dr. Trice Glenn graduated Candler School of Theology in 2012 and is duly trained as a pastoral counselor and licensed professional counselor. Her clinical training has emphasized the integration of theological and psychological theory into responsible clinical practice. She is an adjunct professor in contextual education with the Candler School of Theology and has previously served as an adjunct professor in pastoral care and counseling for the McAfee School of Theology at Mercer University. In addition, she teaches mental health-related courses for various undergraduate and graduate university programs. Vocationally, Dr. Glenn lives a life of serving others. She is a Baptist pastor and chaplain. She currently serves as the Director of Spiritual Care and Counseling Ministry and Youth Pastor at Hopewell Missionary Baptist Church. And I believe it is correct, she just told me that she meets with at least 2,000 people each week. So I'm impressed and in awe. And Dr. Glenn, I will now turn it over to you. Thanks for joining us today.
Sarah, thank you so much for this opportunity. I am thrilled to be here speaking with Emory students and alumni who are chiming in for today's webinar. Thank you to the Office of Alumni Career Services, Emory Alumni Association. This is a topic I'm very passionate about because I've encountered it many times over the last decade with college students and with professionals who bring situations and circumstances related to adversity into our counseling work and sometimes into our academic work. And so today's topic is overcoming adversity, looking at the connection between setbacks and resilience. Just a bit of background about myself, other than what Sarah shared with you. I am the founder and primary therapist of Solace Counseling and Consulting. We are a mental wellness practice that emphasizes holistic approaches to well-being. Our practice offers 3 primary services, and those are counseling, consulting, and training services. And we work with individuals as well as organizations. This practice came about based on my over 20 years of business professional leadership in industries such as entertainment, corporate marketing, information systems, and mental health, of course. And then lastly, the integration of my vocational calling with counseling and with ministry services. And so today's topic is one that will cover several different objectives. If you've seen your outline of objectives, then you'll note that we'll be discussing the relevance of resilience, empowerment, and motivation when facing professional setbacks. We'll also look at some effective coping strategies for handling change and balance that will help you combat adversity. And we'll offer some strategies to help you successfully manage and manage any increased levels of stress that you might be facing. The way that we'll outline this webinar is that we'll begin by looking at the nature and features of adversity. Next, we'll look at how resilience and adversity are interconnected. And finally, I'll discuss steps to overcome setbacks, both personal and professional. I do want to note that this webinar is not a substitute for seeking professional help. If you would like a referral recommendation, you may contact me at seeksolacenow.com, which is our website, and you can also contact our office. The number is on our website, 770-464-5123, and we'll provide you with some information to help you get connected to a referral source. The first thing I'd like you to do is complete the poll that Sarah has provided for you. We want to look at some of the results. The poll question asks, how do you typically cope with stress? We felt it was important to begin by assessing where we are and how you've handled things to date before we talk about perhaps some more effective methods or even some ways to enhance the methods that you're currently using. So if we have any poll results yet, or we're still waiting on just a few?
Almost everyone has voted. I'm going to give you another moment. And if you have anything else that we were not able to include on this list that you would like to share, feel free to type that into the question area. This is anonymous, so don't worry. It's safe space. All right, I'm going to go ahead and read the results. It looks like 29% of folks on the line use sleep as their way to deal with this. 24% food, alcohol, drugs. Only 5% said they work more. 24% use physical activity as their relief. And 19% prayer and spirituality. So really spread across the board. Those are all great mechanisms. And we did not have anyone else type in their own comments, but feel free to share those later if you'd like.
Wow, well, thank you so much for sharing that information. I think that'll be helpful as we go throughout the webinar to look at how helpful and useful are those coping mechanisms. So while we're doing the webinar, I encourage you to reflect on your use of those mechanisms and if they're actually assisting you in navigating the difficult situations you find yourself in. Later, we'll be talking about specific coping strategies that you might also enlist in your coping approaches. And so adversity. Let's talk about adversity. Adversity is something that we all likely encounter at some point in our lives. In my work with college students and professionals, I found that adversity is commonplace, whether it's personal adversity related to family, friends, spouses, finances, or trauma, or if it's professional challenges, such as dealing with difficult coworkers or having a sense of lack of achievement or advancement in your career. Perhaps it's unemployment or office politics. Adversity often has a significant impact on those experiencing it, regardless of the context that you feel that you're experiencing adversity. So it's really important for us to recognize that this is something everyone faces. So what is adversity? Adversity is a difficult or unpleasant situation that one encounters, perhaps considered to be misfortune. That's something that we all could recognize within our lives. There have been certain situations, certain circumstances where we felt that this particular situation was unpleasant and it happened usually unexpected, and it's not something that's welcome for us. Albert Einstein had a great quote saying that adversity introduces a man to himself. I think Einstein's onto something with this. It's through challenges and difficult circumstances that we learn new aspects about our personality, but we also come to understand our own capacity to handle struggles. And so we're going to talk about that today and a little bit more of how that affects us. So, adversity, a couple of things we want to talk about related to adversity. I've already mentioned adversity happens to everyone, meaning no one escapes difficult times and difficult situations. The commonality of adversity means that each person that we encounter has also had to face adversity to some degree in their life. Adversity is usually unexpected. Usually we don't plan for adversity. A situation or a circumstance will come up that throws off our typical planning or our typical routines, and it's that additional layer of unexpectedness that sometimes adds impact to adversity. It's unwelcomed. Adversity is never something we go looking for. Adversity often comes and hits us like a freight train. And so we're not seeking it out and therefore not always excited when it comes. It has a psychological effect on you. Adversity does affect us. It affects our thoughts, it affects our behaviors, it affects the way we approach situations, and we'll talk about that in some detail in the next few slides. What are the features of adversity? Well, one is disruptive. I've already mentioned that it changes things. It changes plans that we've had. It throws us a curveball that we weren't expecting. It forces us to play defense, to find a way to adapt to a new situation. It's typically situational. What does that mean? It means that adversity rarely is one consistent thing long term. It usually is considered adversity when it's triggered by a specific set of events or encounters. And that's a good thing to help us think about, because that means that adversity is temporary. It's not a permanent state. It's something that we'll be able to get beyond and be far away from at some point. It's distortive. Adversity sometimes distorts reality. It begins to make us think that everything is going to be like this, or things are really horrible, things are in their extreme state, when they may not be. It may be, as I said, situational and something that we can overcome and adapt to. But it distorts reality. It also affects our functioning. It affects how we function in the world, how we function in relationships, how we perform in different contexts. Adversity does challenge our way of being in a way that not many other things do. Facing adversity can lead to increased stress levels, feelings of discouragement or disappointment, and sometimes feelings of loss. But it's important that we recognize that adversity does have limitations. So what might that look like in a professional environment? Well, that might look like facing a sudden or looming reduction in force or a RIF, set of layoffs. It may look like failing project deadlines. Even though you're trying to maintain everything that you have, sometimes things just don't work out the way you anticipated. It may mean receiving a pay reduction or furloughs. What about unemployment or slow job search process? We had some questions related to that, how to manage the adversity of a slow job search process, which feels like consistent adversity. Perhaps you're not performing up to your employer's expectations or your supervisor's expectations, and that may feel like adversity that's uphill. And then perhaps the loss of family support or friends in your professional endeavors or academic endeavors can also feel like an adversarial situation. Other challenging experiences could include feeling the time pressure crunch. Many of us pack our days with many activities, many to-do list items, many different tasks that we feel have to be completed in a certain amount of time. But that time pressure, or the sense that we have a lack of time, those can also feel like adversarial moments, the fact that you have so many tasks to do. Competition, either in the workplace or in relationships, Office politics, another sense of space of adversity at times. Financial setbacks or unmet goals and expectations, perhaps in your career. And then if there are health issues that affect your overall performance. All of those situations can feel like an adversary situation. And so it's really important that you look at your own life and see what is it that feels like there's adversity in my life right now. What is triggering me to look at adversity for myself? Well, there are a couple of things that adversity can trigger. Once we're experiencing adversity, depending on how we're coping with it, there's several different ways of being that can get triggered. Sometimes grief is triggered, other times perhaps depression, self-doubt, lack of confidence, ambivalence, even confusion. All of those things can get triggered by a sense that you are in some ways under attack or something is coming against you that you're not able to manage in that moment. Other ways to look at adversity is that sometimes having repeated exposure to adversity or particular extreme experiences trigger these responses or other responses. Oftentimes when we think of adversity, if it were a one-time situation, we feel like we could handle it, we could manage it. But when it's repeated or when there's some blow that just feels very extreme, it throws off our normal system of coping, and we're not quite sure how to manage that adversity. And so it's really important, and you'll find throughout this webinar as we talk further, it's really important to take a stock of what adversity exists in your life and what impact it's having on you. Well, that brings us to resilience. One of the topics that I'm particularly interested in is resilience. And resilience comes for me from research that I did in my doctoral work. Having worked with lots of college students and professionals as well, I was very curious about how is it that some appear to have more socially acceptable resilience than others. My particular doctoral work dealt with those who had experienced childhood trauma and those that seemed somehow, despite everything that they encountered, to be Dean's List students and to, be early pioneers in some area or find a way to excel in corporate management. And I was quite curious about what is it about these certain people that their circumstances didn't send them down a different path. And so that's where my study of resilience started. The formal study of resilience is only a few decades old, but basically resilience is looked at as a dynamic process for healthy human development where someone looks at what resources are available to them personally through relationships or through inner controls that help them navigate situations and spring back. And so basically resilience is the capacity to recover quickly sometimes from difficulties. And that's something for us to consider. There are questions here related to why are some people more resilient than others and why do some people display resilience? Well, resilience is customizable. It's dependent upon the person, how they experience adversity, and likewise, how resilient they become. I have a quote here from Paul Blanchard that says, resilience is the bridge between illness and wellness, from emotional distress into emotional health. And that's a nice, healthy way to look at resilience. What it means is that it is a tool used, it's a conduit to help someone navigate adverse situations and circumstances from a space of distress into a place of health. It doesn't mean that they don't experience the fullness of the adversity, but it does mean that they find a way to galvanize what has happened to them and navigate it. And so we'll be looking at that in a little bit more depth. Okay. Resilience is a dynamic process. So that means that what resilience looks like for me may not be the same thing as what resilience looks like for you. And it's evolving. Perhaps the way I was resilient as a child doesn't look the same way as what resilience as an adult or even as a professional looks like. Resilience is adaptable to situations, and there's some certain situations where you are more likely to have positive coping than others. Perhaps if you've encountered a certain type of situation more than once, you've built up a certain resilience to that versus if this is your first encounter with a new situation. So it's a dynamic process. It's not the same each time, but it is a process of adaptability. Resilience is the capacity to spring back from exposure to adversity and other environmental factors. And so it's important for us to recognize that not only is it different for each person, but the situation that you find yourself in also shapes what that resilience will look like. Differences in each person, be they psycho, spiritual, social functioning, also as well as environmental and relationship factors contribute to resilience. So resilience, in essence, is a protective function. It helps to protect your psychological functioning, your basic fight or flight response. It helps us to be able to navigate very difficult situations. So it serves psychologically as a protective agent for us. We've already mentioned that it is different for each person. Resilience is not is not engaged the same way in each person, but it is always considered to be positive adapting to situations. So it's important to look at resilience as a tool, something that will help you navigate. What factors can influence resilience? Well, resilience can be influenced by age, gender, developmental stage, also your cultural historical context. Those things also affect your resilience and what that looks like. Meaning making is a huge piece of resilience, and we'll talk about that in more depth as well. But meaning making helps create some way to interpret the situation that you've encountered, and that interpretation plays a large role in being able to overcome adversity. The support of others is a major influence, environmental factors, as well as having a sense of purpose. We'll find that there are other protective factors that also affect resilience, and those deal with having caring relationships, finding opportunities to participate in other events and activities, having a positive sense of well-being, as well as some sense of social competence, some problem-solving skills, a sense of autonomy, sense of purpose and future. All of those help us navigate what resilience looks like. And so now let's look at, we've understood what adversity is, and we've looked at what resilience is. Let's look at also the connectedness of the two. Anytime we're engaged in a situation, there are a couple of pieces at play. One, if there's an adversity, then adversity is consistent. It's a difficult, unexpected situation that we're encountering. And then there's resilience. It's how we cope with that particular situation and how we adapt to it. But then there's the connectedness to self and connectedness to others. That's important. That connectedness offers us the greatest opportunity for growth potential. We can grow from adversity as long as we have some system of meaning making that helps us navigate what that looks like. So adversity alone is not necessarily a growth agent, but adversity coupled with resilience and our connectedness of self and connectedness with others helps us navigate growth potential. For example, I mentioned earlier, when we encounter adversity, there are opportunities for us to begin to look at ourselves differently, look at our ability to handle situations differently, and our ability to move beyond certain situations. So I want to answer two questions here before we move forward. A question was posed regarding how do we regain motivation? And then how do we find new direction after multiple setbacks have happened? Well, those are great questions, and we will continue to talk about those throughout this webinar. But one of the things that I offer to you is that it has something to do with how you view where you are. Do you view that you're in a place that is more healthy for you and your potential growth, or are you seeing this simply as a negative setback for you? Motivation is connected to our ability to interpret a situation in a positive way. It's our meaning making, the way that we look at a situation and see what potential there is. And so one of the things that I encourage those who are seeking motivation to do is to reassess what is the ultimate goal that you hope to achieve. Are you looking for career success? Are you looking for something that is fulfilling? Are you looking for something that provides a certain need? What are you looking for? Once you can be honest with yourself about what that is, you are more likely to head down the path and in the direction toward fulfilling that. Once you can not only be honest, but you can look at the positive opportunities there. So let's look at some types of coping that are somewhat helpful and somewhat challenging. So maladaptive coping. One of the ways that is perhaps not going to get you the outcome you're looking for regarding adversity is to avoid it, to assume that it's not there, and to try to ignore it. Other ways would be to isolate yourself, to withdraw from others and attempt to withdraw from the situation. Denial, another way that perhaps is not the healthiest coping for what you're trying to do. And then obsessive rumination, which means just churning over those things over and over again. That doesn't necessarily look for any new outcomes. It doesn't help you find a productive way forward. It simply allows you to continue to focus on what the experience of the adversity has been. And so while those aren't necessarily the healthiest approaches to coping, there are some other approaches that have been found to be helpful. Actively addressing the situation. That means taking stock. What is the actual adversarial situation? What is the impact of this situation to myself and to those connected to me? And to actually choose to take this head on. The next thing is attempt to manage your emotion in the situation. It doesn't mean to mute emotion or to ignore emotion, but it does mean to be honest with yourself and reflect on what emotional response have you had to this situation. You can't tackle things that you won't admit, that you won't acknowledge. And so it's really important to manage the emotions that have come up. If it's hurt, if it's pain, acknowledge that. If it's frustration, if it's discouragement, acknowledge that. And that'll help you be able to cope more readily. Also, taking a problem-solving approach, seeing this as a puzzle. What can I do to make this situation better? What can I do to address this? What can I do to get beyond this in a way that's most helpful to me? And so those are some adaptive coping mechanisms. A couple of questions that came forth also are, how does one remain resilient in the midst of rejection? Well, here again, those three coping strategies. One, actually address what the rejection is connected to for you. Is this a sense of something that's happened over and over in your life or something that happened previous to this situation? If so, what work do you need to do around that so that the impact is not the same the next time around? Making sure that you manage the emotion, problem-solving skills. What do you plan to do differently moving forward so that the rejection doesn't have the same impact on you the next time? Those are things to look at. Okay. What strategies and tips do we offer for personal versus professional setbacks? I think that's a great question. Personal and professional setbacks basically still enlist the same coping strategies. You still need to address the situation. You still need to manage the emotions connected to it. And you still need to begin to enlist some problem-solving approaches to help you navigate that. Okay? Meaning making. Well, we've come to the part that me as a theologian gets a little excited about because the meaning making connected to resilience has a lot of intersection with my particular background in theology. Theology, in many ways, is a meaning making system. It looks at how God and religion are connected through meaning for different individuals. And it also looks at how we can use systems of meaning making to help interpret situations. One of the key factors we mentioned about resilience is that meaning making is helpful in positive coping. And the reason that is helpful in positive coping is because it gives the person experiencing adversity some way to interpret what's happening for them. Some positive outcome, some way to construct it. And so because that meaning making provides a vehicle to navigate difficult situations, I think the study of theology offers an understanding about how relationship to God and relationship to spirituality is a part of that meaning making for many people. One of the things that has been found in research that connects spirituality and resilience is that religiousness and spirituality have their foundation in the human quest for meaning, and that constructing narratives that foster integration help those who are struggling with adversity to find a way to positively name the next steps in this process. And so one of the things that is helpful when looking at meaning making in your situation is to look at, what are you using to construct the positive reality following this adversity you're facing? How are you framing this? Are you framing this as a once in time adversity situation, or are you looking at other ways to navigate this? Other ways to frame this that feel long term. It helps to find a positive reality such as this too shall pass, or the things that come into my life strengthen me for later in life, or that this is a part of shaping and forming who I am or my personality, or find some way to see this particular situation as a part of a journey, a part of something that will enhance you in some way moving forward. Having a meaning-making system also helps to better equip you for coping with difficult circumstances and gives you more equipment to thrive following adversity. So we've talked about adversity, we've talked about resilience, and talked about the interconnectedness between those two. Now, the part that I imagine you came to the webinar for is to talk about how do we do it? Like, what's our plan here to overcome setbacks? We all experience setbacks in a lot of different situations, but there is hope. We can combat negative effects of adversity and stress by using a few steps that are easily understandable, but sometimes hard to put in practice. So the first step is to acknowledge the full impact of those setbacks. This requires us to be honest with ourselves about how the setback has affected us, affected our thoughts, affected our feelings, affected our behaviors, and our relationships. This is an honest reflection of how is this really affecting me? What has this taken from me? Do I feel a sense of loss? Do I feel threatened? Do I feel under attack? Do I feel that I'm somehow less than? Be honest with yourself. What has this particular adversity cost you? because, as I said earlier, you can't tackle what you can't admit. And so it's really important that you're honest about what is this that I'm facing and how has this affected me. If you are feeling extreme depression or feeling overwhelmed, then this would be a time to check in with a mental health professional. Once you do that assessment and you go, this has really, really disrupted something for me, I need to speak with someone, I need some help, then I strongly encourage you to do that. Making sure that you've checked in with how this has affected you physically and mentally and relationally, then it's time to either reach out for someone else or to use this information that you've done from your self-check, from your gut check, to move forward. The next step will be to choose how you're going to cope with this setback and look at healthy ways to cope. And so this is a big one. There are several questions that came in related to how to cope with stress, and we recognize that, and we'll definitely cover that. First of all, though, I would want to discuss with you the difference between stress and distress. We all experience stress in our life. That is going to happen because it is an occurrence. Stress happens anytime there's a new situation or circumstance that we need to adapt to or we need to address. And so stress happens, but distress is different. Distress is the inability to cope effectively when new emotional stressors or psychological stressors enter into the picture. Distress feels overwhelming. And so it's really important that we look at managing our stress levels. Of course, as I mentioned previously, if the stress levels feel too overwhelming, then you definitely need to reach out for a professional to help assist you with coping strategies. But if they are manageable, let's talk about ways that you might be able to enlist coping strategies that are accessible to you. What does distress look like? Well, distress may look like uncharacteristic changes in your work performance or attendance. Sometimes it looks like feeling depressed or lethargic. It may be a sense of being hyperactive or very anxious. Sometimes it's being overly irritable or easily angered. It could look like social withdrawal. There could be changes in your personal dress and hygiene. You can note that there are major changes happening in your eating and sleeping habits or routines. Perhaps you're asking for a lot of special considerations or making excessive excuses about not meeting your demands. Or you have exaggerated emotional responses to events that you normally wouldn't. Perhaps there are headaches and muscle aches that are coming into being for you. And then in this flu season, you also need to look at your immune system and see if there are any colds or any immune deficiencies that seem to be more readily apparent now than before. It may feel like increased disorganization, increased confusion. All of those things might point to the fact that you are in a space of distress. And distress is important to recognize, and the coping strategies that we talk about will in some ways help to alleviate that. I also had a question regarding motivating stress, because some stress is helpful to us, and that's actually called EU stress, E-stress. I often call it the EU stress, but it's EUSTRESS. EU stress is a motivating factor. It's the amount of stress that we need in order to get things done. For example, if you have a new job or a new opportunity, you have a certain degree of stress, but that stress is not overwhelming. It's not overpowering. It's used to motivate you to move forward. So it's important that we have coping strategies, but first to make sure that we've assessed what we're dealing with as far as stress. So here are some suggestions of coping strategies. 1, seek counseling services. That's always a first recommendation for me. I think counseling services offer an opportunity for you to have a safe space to process your unique challenges, your unique stressors, and someone who can work with you directly on coping strategies that will work for you specifically. Also, practice meditation. Mindfulness and meditation are helpful strategies. Use your spiritual resources, particularly prayer or rituals, participating in community. Those are helpful resources for you to use. Deep breathing exercises, as well as visual imagery exercises. Those you can even find on YouTube. You can search for those and do those in the privacy of your home, but they help you to take a second and reconnect to self. And often that helps to alleviate stress. Attend support groups or begin journaling. Journaling is a helpful tool to express whatever is on your mind or in your psyche that is creating struggle for you at this point. Laugh. Laugh can't be overestimated enough. It's important that you have humor in your life. Find spaces to laugh and things that you enjoy. Physical exercise and activity, important. Finding a hobby, perhaps a new hobby. If you haven't had a new hobby lately, you need to reach out and find a new hobby. Go to spaces like Groupon. They have new things you can do every day. Manage your finances. That's very important to minimize stress. If you haven't been managing your finances well, seek out a financial advisor or someone to assist you with that journey. Making sure that you get an adequate amount of sleep and consume a healthy diet. All of those contribute to helping you to navigate stressful situations, as well as creating an atmosphere that is relaxing. Sometimes there's, certain aromas, certain fragrances, sounds that help us to feel calmer in spaces. You can do this in your workspace. You can do this in your home space. You can do this in your vehicle because we spend so much time in our vehicles. Find different ways to infuse relaxation elements into your day. Also, organization plays a big role in feeling de-stressed. Declutter your life. Organize your desk. Organize your house. Organize your car if necessary. Those things will help you feel less stress as well. And ultimately, never, ever give up. Okay, just a few more. Step number 3, choose to grow in some way as a result of getting beyond your setback. And so here's where our meaning making comes into play. We use it as a tool to help us choose how will we come out of this? How will we interpret this event once it's happened? What is the thing that we're hoping to grow into as a result of having faced this and having overcome it? It's looking forward. It's forecasting. How would I like to be better as a result of what I've experienced? And so it's really important that you take the time to make a decision to let this become a growth opportunity for you. That's a decision process that you have to do. You have to choose that this, rather than be something completely negative, has growth potential for me. Our fourth option and our fourth step is to make an action plan based on how life is different now. Often facing an adversity, things aren't quite the way they were before. Things are different in some way. And so it's really important for us to be intentional to make a new action plan based on where life is now. That new plan may mean going in a completely different direction. It may just mean altering the direction you were in slightly. But either way, you need to sit down and be intentional about planning out what are the next steps based on where I am now. Perhaps the next steps look different than what you thought they would be, but that's a part of the adaptability and the adjusting, and that's okay. Plans change every day. Situations and circumstances change plans, but there's hope in the new direction that you're heading in. So plan and head in that direction. And that takes us to our final step, which is to seek out and follow what that new path is. One of the questions asked, what if I don't know what the new path is? That's where the seeking out process comes. If you've tried several paths and you can't seem to find the way forward, that's a time to reflect on where do I need to be going. Sometimes we head down paths based on other people's perceptions of where we need to go, or we head down paths based on fear of not going in certain directions. A part of this a 5-step process that we're talking about allows you to check in with self, be honest with self, and then choose a path that is moving toward where you ultimately are connected, and what is destined for you. And so it's really important that you seek out the path that is the new direction you need to head in, and then actually begin to walk that path. Having a counselor, having some advisor, some mentor can help you begin that journey, because sometimes you need somebody else to help point you in the right direction. Okay? So as a quick review, I realize we're close to our time here. It's really important that we begin to look at what has affected us in the adversity that we have encountered. How has it affected us? How have we grown from it? And what have we chosen to do as a result of it? There are a few questions here related to workplace uncertainty. I hope that we've addressed some of that to a certain degree, but I will acknowledge there are questions here about how to handle situations when being in the workforce is uncertain, or when changes in the workforce are imminent, how to navigate those situations. And those still go back to recognizing the impact this is having on you, seeking out new ways to navigate that situation, and then getting someone to help you, enlisting help along the journey. Okay. Just before we go to questions and answers, I want to leave you with one last thing, is that it's important for us to remember the things that we can change in life. We can change our own thoughts. We can change our attitudes. We can change how we respond to situations. We can change our feelings and even our behaviors and actions. But what we can't change are external and unforeseen circumstances. They will happen for everyone. But we have an opportunity to manage those things that belong to us. We can't change anyone else's thoughts or attitudes or behaviors toward us, but we can always change our own approach. And now we will open up the floor for additional questions at this time, if there are any.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Glenn. So yes, at this time, feel free to type in any questions that you would like to ask Dr. Glenn, whether it is about a specific situation going on in your life or a question about a strategy that she offered today. I am curious to know, reframing was mentioned during the middle of this presentation. What are your techniques for reframing and getting yourself out of a negative mindset?
That's a very good question. Reframing has a lot to do with re-imaging and reimagining a situation in a different way. So, for example, if you're in a situation where perhaps you're facing unemployment and you need to reframe what that means for you, your thoughts initially might be that there's something lacking in me. It challenges my sense of worth, my sense of achievement. Reframing that might look like looking at the opportunity instead, looking at the fact that being released from this particular situation means I'm open now to look at avenues I haven't chosen yet. I can reimagine who I am as a career professional in a different area or in a different company where perhaps I can thrive. So it's choosing to re-envision what that frame looks like in a way that can potentially be positive and growth for you, because you can choose how to navigate that situation.
And do you believe, it's a somewhat controversial question, but we do hear a lot from employers these days that the young professionals in the workforce are not as resilient as some of the more experienced professionals. Why do you think that is true, and why might that be? Are people less resilient now than they once were?
Well, and I know that is controversial. I think it has a lot to do, though, with how someone is qualifying what resilience looks like. That's always been a challenge. Anytime one group of people is trying to define what resilience looks like for another group of people, often they get it wrong because they're not a part of that culture, they're not a part of that particular subset or that developmental stage, and so they're the outside looking in about what positive coping looks like. I think one of the things that's important to recognize is that adaptive coping is based on the person, and it's based on their approach to the situation. And so perhaps rather than the question being why aren't they adaptive, the question would be how are they adapting and what's informing their adaptation process. I think the process is different. When I talk to millennials every day, certain things aren't as important perhaps to them as perhaps a baby boomer or a generation before. And so they may not have a desire to have social adapting the way that someone else is expecting. It does not mean necessarily that they're not adapting.
Okay. All right. That's great to hear that perspective. And on the other side of this, we have an alum here who is looking for new employment, and she is in her 50s and fearful of ageism. How does that relate to resilience? How could she use resilience to help her in that? And do you have any advice about her job search?
I think it's really important to look at the fact that the core of resilience is about adaptability. And anytime we are coming and facing a new situation that presents new challenges for us, I think it's really important for us to look at what we do bring to that situation. What specific gifts or talents or graces in some ways that we bring to this situation that someone else doesn't have. What makes us unique in a beneficial way. And so looking at resilience would mean looking at how there have been things throughout her life or his life that they can pull on and draw on that make them uniquely capable in this time, more so than others. We've been resilient throughout life, and in some ways that would be perhaps beneficial to a new employer because they've been able to navigate so many different situations, and they know their capability in that area.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right. So at this time, we do not have any other questions, but I do know that many of us are probably going to leave this webinar and maybe spot someone in our office. You mentioned conflict in the workplace, and that comes up frequently on our webinars, whether we're talking about workplace conflict or not, it comes up. So if we spot someone who we believe is in need of some resilience training, exercising that muscle, what's the best way to approach that from a counselor standpoint? How do you approach them without offending them?
Well, there are several de-escalation techniques that could be enlisted. I train on those as well. One of the things that I often say is whenever you're preparing to de-escalate a situation, first, it's important to assess what's truly happening in the situation, exercise some empathy and try to understand where the other person might be coming from and what their approach is, and then to try to find an alternative way to navigate the situation with the person. Some personalities are more adversarial than others. And when working with an adversarial personality, it helps to come to a common ground on what is acceptable practice in a work relationship and what's not. We could go into more depth, and I think we do have that coming up in a workshop in the future on dealing with difficult personalities in the workplace.
Exactly. That is why I'm excited to address that. And so on that note, I do want to, well, first, Dr. Glenn, if folks want to reach out to you after the webinar, what's your preferred method of contact?
Please reach out for me through my website, which is seeksolacenow.com. Solace Counseling and Consulting, LLC. Our direct number, 770-464-5123. But the most information that you can get, including contact and email, would be from our website.
Okay, great. And that website is in the chat area if you all would like to visit that now and open it up. And our next webinar in Dr. Glenn's series will be hosted on Wednesday, May 9th, titled Wellness Matters, Understanding Why the Balanced Professional Gets Ahead. So hopefully by May you feel a bit more resilient, and then we can talk about work-life balance, which that all is hand in hand. So stay tuned for information on the recording of this webinar so that you can revisit the content, share with your colleagues, and also stay tuned for our global networking series. Right now, the Alumni Association is working with regional chapters around the world to host networking events and panel discussions and featured guests that are focused on various topics related to what's going on in that city's economy. So look for an event near you, but we will also have webinars available for those who are unable to attend events in person. And you can always hop on Emory Connects, our online career community, to identify a career connection. So thank you, everyone, for your time today. Thank you, Dr. Glenn, for joining us in between your many hats and positions. And everyone have a wonderful rest of the day.